afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I now have a quorum, and we're going to carry on and welcome the Chief Executive and the Chief Financial Officer and the Council's economist to present. Perhaps we'll get straight away with Mr. Gudsall, because the only two people who even understand numbers are in the room anyhow, so you might as well talk to us.
Phil, did you want to open up quickly before I got to the numbers, or I can go straight into the numbers? That's fine as well.
We'll hold yours back until there's a few more people, because you.
All right.
But the ones that are interested in numbers are here already anyhow. So if you can get going, Mr. Gudsall, that'll be pleased.
Okay, thank you very much. Just confirming, Phil, you're going to talk about S&P rating? Yes, okay, so I'll skip over that. So the annual report highlights, he says showing off the report. Please read the summary. It has much more information on it than I'll be able to do justice to in this short wee talk, which I will truncate on the interests of getting to some of the important items, particularly in confidential. So the annual report was issued on 29 September, and it showed a resilient council group that bounced back from the many challenges that arose because of the COVID-19 pandemic and has withstood the worst national disaster experienced by the Auckland region in the group's history. It shows really positive results for the tough year in which Council was able to maintain its financial prudence despite the high inflation and interest rates and the significant weather events that drew on our resources to respond and aid recovery. In terms of our results, we delivered the largest ever capital investment in infrastructure and assets amounting to $2.7 billion, which was around 97% of the budget. Some of the highlights, $1.3 billion for transport-related assets. That does include progressing CRL, the Eastern Busway, and ongoing road renewals. $918 million on clean 3 water assets, including progressing the Central Interceptor project, expanding the Redoubt Road reservoir and putting flood prevention and water quality improvements in place at the Opanuku and Lower Waitaru streams. There was also almost $500 million on other assets, such as upgrades to playgrounds, sports facilities, environmental initiatives and renewals of cultural venues. As we know, the group uses debt to help finance capital investment, as this helps to spread the cost of assets across the generations that will use them. As a result, total net debt rose to $12.4 billion from $11.1 billion a year earlier. At the same time, the overall total asset base increased by $2.6 billion to $73 billion. The Council has a policy of keeping its debt to revenue ratio below 290%, and its position remained well below that at 253% at year end, which was also down from 257% a year earlier. Operating expenditure, excluding other losses, was $214 million, and that was higher than budget at $5.3 billion. A significant portion of this was related to depreciation and amortisation, up on budget due to higher depreciation of roading, water and wastewater assets after the budget was set. Our budget also overestimated the amount of staff time that would be able to be capitalised to projects, so staff costs were $26 million higher than budget. And with the shortage of skilled staff, there were some critical vacancies that had to be filled with temporary staff. On the revenue side, total group revenue excluding other gains was $6.7 billion, $421 million higher than budget, although as I've noted before, this included some big one-off and non-cash revenues, such as assets vested with the group and a significant donation of artworks. Overall, we ended the year with an operating surplus before gains and losses that was $207 million higher than budget at $1.4 billion. Which goes to show that we did really well, particularly given the challenges of the second half. The annual report shows that looking ahead, which is where we are now, we need to continue to manage our costs carefully in this inflationary and high interest rate environment, work with Aucklanders to increase the region's resilience and ensure that new infrastructure and renewals are resilient to the impacts of climate change. So that's a quick wander through the annual report. As I said, the summary document, let alone the other volumes behind it, are well worth a read. If I talk to now the financial performance for council parent and the group to 30 September, capital investment for the group was 92% of budgeted delivery, with almost $700 million spent. The variance to 100% was largely due to the timing of spend on capital projects related to flood recovery. During the budget preparation, the cost for that was spread across the year, and the expenses will be coming up later in the year. Watercare incurred the highest expenditure in the group at $278 million, including spend on Central Interceptor, Snell's wastewater treatment plant upgrade, Warkworth to Snell's transfer pipeline, and Redoubt Road reservoir construction. Some of the keys in terms of those deliveries: the tunnel boring machine for the Central Interceptor broke through at May Road in early September, and Link Sewer B tunnelling works were continuing at a good rate. For transport, Tamaki Drive Northern Footpath has been completed and open to the public. Lincoln North and South Bus Lane improvement projects have been completed as well. Net direct expenses were $25 million, or 10% favourable to budget, and I'll point out a few aspects on that. Firstly, the regional fuel tax was on track year to date at $37 million. Fees and user charges revenue were $11 million over budget, mainly due to building consents, licences and permits revenue having higher processing volumes than budgeted, so quite a good green shoot, that one. Partly offset by water revenues and port storage and demurrage, which were both under budget. Employee benefit costs were $5 million higher than budget, mainly because of lower labour capitalisation, as I mentioned for the prior year as well, and timing impacts of annual leave being taken. There was also an $8 million budget misalignment in Watercare's employee benefits, so if we corrected for that, the employee benefits would actually be $3 million below budget. Finance costs were $15 million higher than budget year to date, and with the weighted average cost of funds being 4.67% compared to the budget of 4.54%. So obviously that impact is on the non-hedged portion of our debt. Other direct expenditure was $21 million, lower than budget, and as already mentioned, Watercare had that $8 million budget misalignment, which should turn up in this space. And if that is taken account of, then direct expenditure would be $13 million below budget. Net debt, well, net debt figure decreased by $664 million, and that's mainly due to the proceeds from the partial sale of the group's airport shares, which we have a report back on later in the agenda. That is partially offset by the continuing group capital investment funding requirements, and we've also got some slides on that in the airport shares session as well. The share sale proceeds were largely held as term deposits at month end, with the remaining debt repayments occurring over October and have been completed now, with any funds that we had received being held on account. All covenant and borrowing thresholds were achieved, and S&P confirmed their maintenance of our AA rating, and there's a wee bit more about that later from Phil. So worth noting, the net debt balance at 30 September 23 was lower than the annual plan year-end debt balance of $11.8 billion by $116 million. In terms of parent, capital expenditure $4 million below budget. I won't go through the details on that. Net direct expenditure was $21 million favourable to budget, and we've talked about fees and charges and some of the volumes in there. Direct expenditure was $3 million lower, and that's mainly around employee benefits being $7 million favourable, mainly from vacancies, and that's particularly in areas that require specialised skills. And grants expenditure was $8 million higher than budgeted, and that's around the timing of payments of grants compared to budget. So that's a real fly through, your worship, on the basis that there are quite a few items to get through. So I'll pass back to Phil if that's okay.
I've got a question, if that's all right.
Yes, absolutely.
All that excellent performance of CapEx being at over 96% of what you expect, is that helped along by the fact that some of our CapEx was way overrun, so we have another $1 billion on top of the CRL that we didn't expect to have? Does that make our CapEx look really good because it cost more than it should have? I just want to make sure that I'm not hearing bad news dressed up as good news, which, of of course, nobody in your profession would do, of course.
We do have a professional reputation to maintain, correct.
So
The City Rail investment was 84 million compared to 87 or 97% of their budget. So that's not a significant factor in the capital delivery.
but when something goes wildly over by $1 billion, it can make our capex. What are we comparing with? We're comparing with a budget that didn't have that billion in it, and so we blew that billion, and so we could have said we've done 98%, and we just didn't do a billion other things because we blew it on a cost overrun. How do I read that and know that knowing there's a few dogs in there, how do I find them when I read that? Because it looks glowingly good until I ask some questions, and it might be glowingly good, but I don't know. I want to know that $500 million, $1 billion overrun is not a good news. It shouldn't be there part of saying we've kept up to our capex thing, because it might be that you've not spent $1 billion somewhere else that we could have spent had we better control of that cost of that project.
Thank you for the question. It's quite a complicated question. With regard to CRL, the cost of the increase will be shown in future years, and we'll report against that as it becomes the current budget. But I think the fundamental aspect of your question is that spend alone is not an indicator of success of your capital expenditure. You also need to know that the project that you wanted to get was achieved for the same level of spend. The degree to which we can report on that is how we deliver our other projects. So hence why I talked to some of the aspects which have been delivered. The annual report, for instance, has a number of aspects of the delivery that is achieved for the spend, and numbers are only ever part of the performance story. Yes, we're spending on track and on budget, and when you split it down in the dashboard across the various entities, you can see where that's coming from. We monitor those projects at a management level against their scope, benefits and time, as well as cost. Hopefully that provides a theme.
And somehow or other, I want to be able to see that if our budget spend of the year was, say, $2 billion on capex and provided 10 projects, say, for instance, easily, well, we can say, we got 9.5 projects, so that's pretty good. We got 9 projects, so we didn't do one of them, righto. But we still spent $2 billion. So you give yourself a ticket to spending $2 billion, but in fact, you really should have only spent $1.8 billion if you only got 9 of them. So how do I know that we've got some, where's the feedback for, because I know in my business, I'll go to a building we're doing now, and I've set aside a certain amount of money. And so I will be really pissed off if it comes to any more money than that, and I will absolutely know. But I'm not quite sure that I'll know that we've spent more than what our budget was. And so I want budget of all the things that you have done, and the ones you didn't do, well, that budget will sit aside. We haven't spent that. But at this moment here, the 96% could be fantastic, or it could be a pile of crock. I'm not able to tell. And I've got this nasty, suspicious mind.
I think you've got an inquiring, appropriate governance mind, Your Worship.
Thank you. But,
it's the same thing, maybe. Slide 3 on the dashboard provides one layer down in terms of detail on the spend and the what has been delivered for the spend. However, it doesn't go to that level that you're talking about with respect to, say, major projects and the delivery of those major projects, so that it splits down the normal project management scope, time, benefit, cost aspects. So if I was to work with yourself and your office around how we could improve that reporting around the capital.
Right, I'd like to do that. I mean, Councillor Williamson is looking at the OPEX things, and good on him for that. And I'm very pleased that he's doing that. My particular experience is in monitoring CapEx experience. And so with the permission of my fellow councillors, I would like to take up that opportunity and between you, come up with something which I feel good, and then perhaps explain it so all of you around the table can just feel that not only we've done 96% of the work, but we've got 70% of them on budget, 20% of them over budget, and we have a surprise. We need to go under budget on one, which would be bloody good. If that's ever happened before, I don't know. You know, I would expect 75% of my projects to be done under budget and 25% of them will go over, so I end up with a bit under overall. But then again, and so, are you all happy if I spend some time with the CFO and come up with that? So, righto, well, that's something that's come out of that. Thank you for that, answering that question, Councillor. I've got Councillor Philippina and Councillor Walker wish to ask questions of you, Mr. Gutzel.
Thank you, Mayor. Tēnā kōrua, Peter, just a question around the regional fuel tax. I don't know whether that's going to be addressed in the confidential part of the item, but it'll be interesting to see what timeline you have about bringing the impact of that to the council. Kia ora.
I brought that to your attention for obvious reasons. It is currently scheduled to deliver 150 million over this budget year, and I wanted to let you know that it's on track to achieve that. We have not made any assumptions around what might change with the new government. We are continuing to work under the current situation until something else becomes clear.
Ka pai supplementary,
Well, nevertheless, I think I'll follow. It's quite clear that there is going to be coming, so I want some thinking to be going on that. And when we do discuss that, it certainly won't be in secret. It's going to be in public. Is that all right?
No, but I still had a supplementary question. So the supplementary question in regards to the regional fuel tax is that at what time do you think, and I know there'll be some discussions with the Mayor and the incoming government, has there been any indication as to when everything will end up being confirmed? And yes, the regional fuel tax is going and everything. So our forward planning, what is that up to next year?
Quite a degree of questions in there. I'm not a political commentator in the crystal ball around the coalition and how that might form and the changes. I can't tell. However, what I can do and what the team is doing is taking the forward view on various options and risks, because we had seen what had been proposed going into the election. We also have the long-term view currently going on with the long-term plan, and that'll be the aspect that has to take all of these things into account. And as far as I can tell, the sooner the better for us to have clarity around some of those. But I'm not in the box seat. I'll be a receiver of that information when it becomes available.
Yeah, I don't think, just to clarify, what I'm saying is that, Peter, at the moment, you as the financial manager is still planning ahead for the next year or 2 or 3 in regards to the regional fuel tax. That's the key thing. I'm assuming that we would have to make decisions for a year at least, so there's some surety, and then wait for discussions. That's really the clarification.
We continue to work off the budget that the governing body agreed to at the end of June last year for this current year, and indeed the long-term plan that was set up for 2021 to 31. That doesn't mean we're not doing scenario planning around the outside of potential different options, and that may have to feed into the long-term plan that is currently under consideration.
Kia ora. I look forward to update from yourself, Mayor.
Good question, thank you, Councillor Philippina. Very good. Councillor Walker and then Councillor Henderson.
So, just a couple of questions. Just on the depreciation, and you reference water care. So the assumption I'm making, but correct me if I'm wrong, is that we're constantly revaluing assets, and if the revaluation of those assets reflects the current prices, what follows is that our depreciation goes up accordingly. Is that the case?
That's generally the case. We used if I've got the acronym right, optimised depreciated replacement value, which effectively does take the cost of replacement into account for that valuation for a number of our assets. Some of our assets are held for investment purposes, and they're valued on a different basis.
Sure. The other question I'd ask, and I know it's one that Councillor Williamson and I both take an interest in, and that's around working with information. I find Nexus very, very difficult. You can't play with it. Increasingly, you've got tools like AI that you can use to interrogate just about anything, and lay people can do that. So I just make the point that we as councillors need to have more information available to us that we can use modern tools to use, and so do members of the public. We need to be more transparent there, and we could get a lot of assistance and advice and some oversight from people in that respect, because as much and all as this is a report for us, it is a report for Aucklanders because it's their money that we're playing with. So I just put that out there. Thank you. Any response around the AI tools that we're looking to use, Mr. Gutsall?
No, just...
Artificial intelligence, chat, and you know all about that.
Thank you for the comment. We can explore some of those options.
We're just in the early information age still here. But a very good, exciting questions, which you won't get an exciting answer for, so we'll go on to Shane Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are you working with the Expenditure Committee on a line-by-line review? And if so, when will we be start seeing the results from that work?
Thank you for the question, Councillor, and through you, Your Worship. We've been updating for the Revenue, Expenditure and Value Committee the line-by-line analysis that we completed, or the information set that we provided earlier. We've been updating that for the latest budget round and continue to work with the Chair and any other members of that who are willing to engage on it or wanting to engage on it. The focus of the Rev Committee at this particular point in time is looking at its normal role of procurement approvals and also the service profile work that has been developed so that there can be a running review of performance, revenue, expenditure within a service profile fit, so that it fits that tactical ground between line and high picture, so it comes in at the middle.
Yeah, thank you. I do thank you for the data set and for the updating of it recently. What hasn't happened though is it doesn't seem to have been translated into anything. We haven't gone through and had a look at these lines and thought, oh, we can trim a bit off there. Oh, we might need to add a little bit there. So I'm just asking, could I get an update on that when possible, on how that work is going?
Thank you. I'm going to go to the Chief Executive now. We swapped around and gave Mr. Gutsall first crack at, as there are a number of you who are a little bit late getting back. But here we go. Thank you, Philip.
Kia ora, everyone. So just a quick non-financial summary for the month. I'll start with recovery. Of course, we started the month off concluding the negotiation with central government, and then on the 6th of October you signed off the, at a high level at least, the framing of the buyout scheme. You've got further work on your agenda later today, but of course this has been a key focus in the month, getting ready with the categorisation, evaluation methodology and so on. I'm aware, and we had a public input session earlier, of course we've got people in the community who are anxious that that work delivers up for them in the form of offers, people in sensitive situations and what have you. The team's working as hard as they can. I mentioned in that session that we are finalising a timeline so that we can provide people with as much clarity as possible. So key focus in the recovery area this month. We have continued to build up our capacity in that space to suit the work program. We've also significantly bolstered through the creation of navigator roles, so-called. These are people who can help folk in the community find their way around the different agencies and so on that can assist them at this time. And I do want to acknowledge publicly here the assistance of MSD with that work. Just so you're aware, MSD, central government, have contributed in the region of $4 million to assist our work in that space. So a direct financial contribution to the costs of the recovery effort. And I particularly want to acknowledge Linda Greenalge and our team, who's been instrumental in securing that funding and making those arrangements. So I'll leave recovery at that point. Talking to central government matters, the key thing for you to be aware of in relation to the water reform is that the National Transition Unit is pausing all workforce-related work on the water reform. This is quite significant, obviously, for folk in water care and in healthy waters. So the things that were scheduled to happen in preparation for go live next year are to an extent on hold, particularly where they affect our employees. So frankly, with the uncertainty that sits at the moment, albeit that the National Transition Unit still has current legislation around this to pursue, common sense has prevailed, and we will not be taking our people through unnecessary change. So that is good news. Of course, what remains to be seen is the form of any future arrangement with Three Waters. We'll just have to bide our time and continue to work constructively with government over the shape of that. Needless to say, we've got some views about what might be in council's best interest and what might not. I would also, just on the reform package, and Megan is here if you want to probe this in any more detail, but we're finalising submissions on the draft national policy statements, national planning framework and such like. It's the key thing that's happening presently in that space. I want to mention staff engagement. This is probably of more concern to me than yourselves, but it's important you understand where things sit in terms of the mood and morale of the organisation. It's pleasing, given how difficult recent times have been, that we've largely preserved a positive sentiment in the organisation in terms of staff engagement that we measure in quite consistent and scientific terms. There's been a tiny drop-off in a couple of areas, but also, for the most part, we've kept things in a good place. So I won't go into further detail, but if people have questions for me, we can cover that off outside of this. I want to talk in the operational space. Well, firstly, just to acknowledge that our key performance metrics operationally are on track. I have talked to you in both of the last 2 months about concerns in the animal management area. If you recall, our concern about dog numbers, numbers in terms of roaming dogs, the number that we're requiring to accommodate in our shelters and such like. So having identified the problem, what's the action? Well, the action this month is that we're recruiting 19 more animal management officers. This is the scale of the problem. We need to bolster our numbers so that we've got critical mass out there in the field picking up dogs and dealing with these dangerous dog situations. So that's in train at the moment. We will have a few of those people doing some educational work, but the majority are in the field out there in our communities, and we will have some capacity to do, frankly, some blitzes in critical areas where we're having problems. Craig advises that we have also progressed some good work with the police, getting the relationship between ourselves and police on the ground optimal, and we're continuing to look at the capacity of our shelters. That will come back to you reasonably soon when we've got a clear view about what the best arrangement is in terms of expanding our shelter capacity. Continuing, I do want to acknowledge, but perhaps discuss for another day, the fact of an ombudsman report being received into the local government space this week around use of workshops. The critique being that perhaps workshops are being overused in the local government sphere. We actually have some good guidance and principles around this that, in a sense, safeguard us. We don't take decisions in workshops. We publish the fact of workshops happening there for transparency reasons and what have you, but I do need to say to you that there will be some reflections for us out of that we need to work through, and it will flow into your meeting schedule. We should ask ourselves the question of whether all workshops are required, and if they're required, whether they are all happening behind closed doors. We do have a transparency obligation there, and I think I would like us to come back to that shortly and have that conversation. I'm being blunt with you, but I think there's an opportunity to streamline some of our workshop time a little bit, and we'll return to that shortly. I wanted to mention, this is internal as well, but of interest to you, we've just achieved advanced status in terms of the gender tick. That might sound like jargon. What it is an assessment independently of the organisation in terms of whether we're up to the mark in terms of employment practices, pay equity and such like in the gender space. So quite a robust assessment. It's quite important that we're able to demonstrate in terms of our employer brand, our proposition that we have the right practices from gender equity perspective in the organisation, and we've just been awarded the advanced tick in that regard. More good news, we've also just been through our accident compensation audit. That will see us retain tertiary status. This is a significant indicator of the maturity of our health and safety systems, our care for people, and it's also of significant financial benefit to the council that we retain tertiary accreditation in the management of our accident compensation risk and liability. Very finally, I acknowledge that I spent a couple of days with the Mayor in Brisbane, the point being that we were looking at the South East Queensland City deal arrangement and other things, and had discussions with Brisbane about benchmarking and exchange of opportunities between the two cities. Brisbane is, while not identical to Auckland in lots of ways, is the closest, most comparable local government entity in terms of scale that we have in this part of the world, and there are opportunities to pursue there, and I am grateful for the Mayor's initiative in joining me in Brisbane and having some of those conversations. Peter mentioned our credit rating. We have had confirmation from Standard & Poor's that our credit rating is safe at AA for the year. I possibly don't need to talk about what sits in behind that. Clearly they have a very thorough look at our practices, our discipline and so on in the organisation, and it speaks volumes for their confidence. You know, for all of the issues that we're facing, it speaks volumes to, you know, their confidence in the organisation's prudent stewardship of resources. So perhaps just to acknowledge the people most immediately involved in that being Peter, John Bishop and others, but more widely in the organisation in terms of financial discipline. So, Your Worship, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that report. I have a couple of questions from various people. I noticed that too much use of workshops. There's too much use of the Ombudsman in my view, but that's just my view. Councillor Walker.
Just got a question as it goes to transparency around the workshops. My observation first is that information in the workshops is often the best information for us to convey to the public, because more often than not we've got PowerPoint presentations, it's distilled down, it's easy to understand, often there are graphics and tools and the like, often far better than necessarily what we have in meetings. The other observation I make is that often, sometime after the workshop, there's no reason why much of that information couldn't be loaded onto the council's website, so that people understand in a far more fulsome way an issue. And I think that's what we need to move towards as quickly as we can, and we should be asking ourselves and having some form of checklist on a regular basis, can we put this out there? Because the more the people out there are informed about us, the more that they can assist us and the more confidence that they have in our decision making, which is still, I think, at a low point. So I put that question to you. There may be a mechanism whereby you can determine, you know, that there's something in a presentation that is pretty sensitive, okay, but release the balance. What do you think, Phil?
I think, Councillor, there is an opportunity to do that, absolutely, and I think we should ask ourselves the question, what can we do more quickly in terms of sharing that? But I would start with the earlier question, do we need the workshop in the first place? How do we get the best value for you in terms of use of your time? And I wouldn't make the fatal mistake of suggesting we have a workshop on workshops, but perhaps a discussion with key committee chairs and what have you in short order. We will, I know you've had some written advice through Meredith and Legal about the Ombudsman report, so if you haven't had an opportunity, please do have a look at that, and we'll discuss it in due course. There are some reflections for us in that. I'm not suggesting even remotely that we're bad in this space, but we should, in good faith, have a look at it.
And I can just confirm as well that we do actually release workshop material. We take a very close look at it, and for example, the budget committee workshops that we've been holding, it's with a lens that they will be released in due course.
Just a supplementary issue that goes to the workshop information. As a councillor, one of the things that we need is information in advance, so that the stuff isn't just dropped on us at the last minute, because it's incredibly difficult to cope with that. So in that respect, I find workshops are a valuable tool. Unless the organisation wants to even be more transparent and put out papers and the like and give it to us in advance, which would be even better. But there's paranoia within the organisation around that, so we have these workshops that cover for that. That's my observation.
Thank you. Look, I'm not sure I would accept the paranoia comment, but sometimes it's very much a fact of running very fast up till the last minute to get material to you in time. That's the kind of pace we're working to.
Supplementary issue, I mean, Nexus is the most draconian piece of platform you can deal with. You can't download, you can't print, you can't interrogate it very well. It just is incredibly inefficient in terms of our time. So I just I just want to signal that. I find it really very difficult doing my job with that, particularly when you've got massive documents, which we have.
Yeah, I acknowledge that comment. It's something that Councillor Williamson and I have discussed at length and repeatedly. The team is looking at the next generation of product to support you. That's all I can say at this stage. But I'm aware of the criticism, and we will find a solution for the longer term.
Hopefully off the shelf. Lottie, fully pleased to the fore.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Phil and team, for your presentation. Just commending us on the pay equity advance tick that we got. That's good news. I just wanted to ask a question though about pay equity for our Pasifika workers, and in particular Pasifika women, just being mindful and noting that the pay gap for Pasifika women in particular is much greater than for other women. Kia ora.
I can confirm we have, I can see RJ online, but we have done that analysis. We know to a high level of certainty where we have issues with pay equity across our workforce, gender-wise and in terms of ethnicity. The pleasing bit is that we don't just know, but we've been acting to close it with differential movements in terms of pay increases over the last 18 months or so, but RJ might comment.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Kia ora, councillor-elected members. The problem here is we lack Pasifika employees higher up in the organisation in our tier 1, 2, 3 and 4 roles. So that drives a pay equity difference. So it's not so much the difference in the band compared to different ethnicities, it's the vertical stack that goes on in the organisation. So that's why the reporting shows a difference. And one of our initiatives is to get a workforce that better reflects the communities in which we serve, and also making sure we have fair representation of different ethnicities in the layers through council.
Kia ora, thank you. Are you able to elaborate, what are we doing? What are some of the initiatives that we're doing in order to put that right?
First of all, making sure that our interview panels reflect the diversity of the communities we serve, so we have good representation on panels across ethnicity. Also identifying talent to move up in the organisation through talent and succession planning. And also, as we look at the pay differences within bands each time we do it, that we are compensating to make sure that those are fair and equitable across each of the bands that people sit in.
Kia ora, thank you.
We are reviewing our diversity strategy now, and the next generation of initiatives will come clear out of that process.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor Simpson.
Thank you. Phil, you've been in the job now for the famous 100 days, you know, and they always ask people how their first 100 days goes in the job. So my question to you is, over the 100 days that you've been in the role, what do you think is your, I mean, there's lots of achievements I'm sure you could say, but what would be, say, your top 2, and what's your biggest challenge?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I think my first priority had to be to keep things on the level, provide a bit of ongoing stable leadership into what is an organisation of 6,500 people. So I think that has gone very well. I think the transition with Jim's departure has gone as well as I could have hoped for. It's required a bit of work getting out around the organisation, talking to a very large number of staff just to give them a sense of direction and continuity and so on. So might not sound very tangible, but a lot of work goes into that to provide that sense of direction and understanding of priorities. I have to say the progress in the recovery space and nailing the negotiations with the Crown, important, the sale of the airport shares. I know there are different views around that, but the transaction was done and it was a good result, and I'm very grateful for the support of Peter and his team in proceeding with that. I think if I could mention one other thing, it is that clearly we finished the last financial year agreeing an annual plan that had savings targets built into it, and it also had a whole lot of consequential changes operationally to meet the financial situation. We tend to get to the end of these planning processes and everyone breathes a sigh of relief, but actually that's where some quite significant work starts for us in terms of implementation. The change processes out of that are well progressed, the savings are well progressed, and we have clarity for the most part about where we're going to drive those savings out of. So that's a good place for us to be in October following a decision at the very end of June.
Thank you very much for that. Two more questions and then we'll move on. Councillor Ferry and Councillor Stewart, please.
Mine's more a comment, so I'll wait for comments, sorry.
Sorry, mate. Councillor Stewart. Or do we do another Howick joint one?
I'll take a call. Just two areas I'd like to just quickly get probably just to sort of fly a kite. One of the things I find really frustrating about the council compared to central government is the lack of any quantifying of the fiscal risks that we face going forward. And in the fiscal responsibility legislation that government has to work under, the Minister of, or the Treasury and the Minister of Finance have to try to somehow keep publishing what are the big risks and trying to quantify them. Now, I know there's massive big risk coming in CRL costs. Who knows? But I think it's a much bigger number than anybody here keeps saying. We've got a big number coming with regards to the flood recovery, and we've got another big number coming with making space for water, and another big number for water care if it comes back to us and so on. Can I just ask if it's possible to add an extra bit to these reports which tries to lay out for us, not in specifics because you'll never get it right, but to try to quantify in a ballpark area what are those risks we face? Because we can nickel and dime $1 million here and 2 million there, and bang goes $1 billion, and you go, Jesus, where did that come from? Because it wasn't in somewhere in the documents. So if we could just, I'm just asking if it was possible to apply a little bit of the fiscal responsibility legislation to something we've got here. I know we're not compelled to do it, but I'd just like to think about that.
And we're dealing with big numbers.
Oh, I think most of us would support that.
And the second one, which is, okay, and the second one, which is completely at the other end of the field, it's to do with the dog stuff. I've been out to a couple of shelters and I've looked, and I think there's an issue that there needs to be a speedier process, but it has to be a two-phase. There are dogs running loose in our patch, and I've been confronted by a couple of them on occasion, that have no collar, no chip, big bull mastiff teeth, and if they got hold of a human being, would really do some damage, and they've got no owners even, they're just wandering. I don't see why we should keep those for when we're capturing them for anywhere near the length of time someone's little pooch that's got the yellow collar tag, they paid money for registration, it's got the microchip, and it happened to get out the door when the front door was left open. And I just wonder if we can change some of our bylaw with regards to dogs to sort of have a two-way processing. For the really bad ones, we can get them and deal to them quite quickly, but we don't kill off someone's poor pooch that's been looked after and loved. I'll leave it at that.
Councillor, I'll take that away on advisement and come back to you. I believe it's a function of the dog control legislation to an extent, but we'll look at it.
We should lobby to get it changed if we can.
It's a thing for all councils. I tried some years up north.
I know.
10 days for things. I made some suggestions which weren't welcomed by people, so I've been told don't make those again, so I won't.
And on the first issue, I think the best thing that I can do on that space is look at the strategic risks that we take through to the Audit and Risk Committee and see whether they fit the bill for the type of questions you're asking. We also have our own financial framework that we've got to work with, and of course being the disclosures for NZX. So whenever we've got an event that we think that is going to cause very big conniptions, we have to challenge it, check it, see whether we've got the levers to deal with it and float it up. But why don't I go back and check those risks that go to audit and risk to see if they fit the bill of what you're talking about?
But CRL would be one example, I think, where it would be better to have a better feeling, not a guarantee, because it's going to keep slipping all the time, but just have a better feeling with where that stuff lies. It's just a personal view.
Thank you very much for asking the question, and thank you very much for a fulsome answer there, Mr. Gutsell, Councillor Fletcher, and then we're going to move on.
I'm just interested to know a little bit more about where the formal correspondence is on the deferral of Plan Change 78. Sure, we've got potentially a new government coming in, but I've seen some of the correspondence, including the most recent letter, I think, from Megan Woods, but I just wonder whether you can give me any more insight into the paper trail that surrounds that decision for the moment.
I have some knowledge, but I suspect Megan behind me will have a substantially more reliable answer.
Through the chair, thanks for the question. We have been in correspondence through Chair Hills with the previous Minister for the Environment, Minister Parker. Of course, nothing has happened. And Minister Parker did write us a letter just really on the eve of the change of government. And so we did respond back. That was in particular in relation to the time frame for Plan Change 78. We went back to him again and said, you know, this really isn't working anymore. But of course, we're waiting now for the new government. So really our focus is to, both through the officials, but also whatever political process you choose to use, or the Mayor chooses to use, is to brief the new incoming minister about the specific challenges that we have here in Auckland and how Plan Change 78 does or does not help us with those challenges. So we have had correspondence with Minister Parker, but nothing has happened as a result of that.
And in terms of flood recovery, have there been any interface between the correspondence that we've had with government ministers and the ongoing issues around flood recovery and the potential impact of Plan Change 78 continuing?
So that was the correspondence we got just lately from Minister Parker, who effectively said, oh, you know, officials advised me that, you know, you're still able to continue to make some changes to the unitary plan and Plan Change 78. And that was where we went back to him and said, actually, that's not true. We've got a real challenge with it. But of course, as I said, now we're waiting for the new government. So it doesn't seem to, the government didn't really understand where we were coming from, so we're going to try, I guess, with the new government.
So that body of work that you're doing, is that going to be part of the Mayor's ongoing manifesto? I'm really interested to know where the focus of staff work on that. You know, I want to be assured that we're not continuing with a responsiveness to Plan Change 78, but that we're actually using our time proactively to demonstrate what needs to happen going forward.
Look, absolutely. So we absolutely are working on the changes and to come back to you for a conversation about where does your risk tolerance lie now and does there need to be changes to the unitary plan around development, say in flood-prone areas. We are absolutely working on that. We're in a little bit of a difficult situation in that we still have a legislative mandate and timeframes for Plan Change 78, but we have paused a lot of that work. There is still some work that we're doing, and we've advised you through the Planning Committee that there are still some kind of bespoke Plan Change 78 issues that are not impacted by the flood stuff, so we are still doing that work, but we have paused most of the rest of it. We are looking then, a little bit like the water reform, looking for a very early direction from the new government to kind of say, are we still in this or not? Is there going to be some change? And that will give us a little bit more direction, and we can come back to you and say, you know, how do you think this is going to go and what should we do?
It would be very helpful that there be some public communication in and around this issue, because there does seem to be a lot of confusion. and to have the council's position be clarified would be, I think, beneficial.
Thanks, that's a really helpful comment, thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm going to move that we receive these reports.
Oh, wait.
Pardon? Oh, the Deputy Mayor has joined me on that one there. All those in favour, please say aye. Wait, what? No, I want to get on with it. Don't ask for comments when you, in case you get one. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you very much. Controversies, meaning long-term plan deliberative engagement. I see some Natalie dressed people here waiting to invade our